Okay, here we go. So, hi, everybody. It's so great to be here. I am here today with Erin DeLand, who is a dear friend and colleague of mine. We met way back when. We were trying to figure that out earlier. I think it was 11 years ago. We met in New York at a training program. And Erin is a developmental play specialist for autism. And he is here today to talk about how to work with our kids who are really picky eaters, especially those kids who are anywhere on the spectrum, because working with food is such a different, it's a key piece of the puzzle for these kids, but it's a very different challenge in getting them to make some of the changes. It's not just about the different nutrients that they're getting in their body, but teaching them new habits, and a new relationship with food is one of the biggest pieces and one of the biggest obstacles to making those changes. So Erin, welcome. I'm so excited to be chatting with you.
Having me. This is great. Just to give sort of your viewers a bit more of my background, I've been working in autism for roughly 20 years, and I began my career, excuse me, working in behavioral field for a couple of years, and I found my way into play therapy, and that's that's sort of the main trunk of what I do and what I teach families is how to interact with their kids, how to play with their kids for social development. Now, along the way, on those 20 years, I picked up a lot of other things, and it became clear to me fairly early on that helping families with a child with autism is a holistic approach. Play is great, and that's sort of the main avenue which I approach it, but there's all these other things that really, no matter what you're doing, you have to take into account. And one of those things that really struck a sort of a passion and a chord with me was, what are these kids eating, and how is it impacting their lives, and why are some of these kids really against eating most foods and things like that. So that's sort of a brief overview of where I came from and sort of what my experience is. I travel all over the world doing this stuff, teaching families in groups and in their homes, and I just absolutely love it. So what I'd like to do is share with you guys today some of the things that I've learned, some of the things I'm just starting to figure out that are very exciting. And hopefully it'll be useful.
Well, before we dive into sort of the nuts and bolts here, I would actually love to hear a little bit more about what inspired you to work with autistic kids to begin with, because it's a very important and specific population.
Yeah, well, that's a very specific story too. So when I graduated college, I was living in Portland, your neck of the woods, and I had gotten a job as a preschool teacher. And in my classroom, there was one little boy named Avery who had some special needs. I don't think that it was autism necessarily, but sort of presented that way in some ways. And what I experienced with him was that anytime he was in the classroom setting, he was, it was just a train wreck. He was all over the place. He was crying. Nothing sat right with him. He just looked out of sorts and uncomfortable. And the way my classroom was set up is I could split it in two, and I'd close off a section, and I'd take him over there, and he would calm down, and he was great, he was playful, he was connected. And so that kind of sparked my curiosity about, what about all these other kids that don't kind of learn the same way and are different, and maybe don't get the same attention that typical kids get. And so I quit that job, and I just went about my business working, I think it was construction at the time, to pay some bills. And I started and we all got laid off from this construction job. So I started looking in the paper, and I saw this little want ad that said, come work with my autistic child. And it was a very small ad, sort of tucked back, back when we used want ads. Shows you how old I am. And so I answered it. And I went in and I interviewed, and had a sort of rapport with this little boy right away. He took me by the hand. He sat me down in this room. He was taking care of me. I was there to sort of try out and do therapy with him. And I think I only got the job because we had such a nice little rapport together kind of instantly. And that started me on my experience of behavioral therapy, sort of what is more commonly known as ABA, which is, very much sort of kind of dog training adapted for kids. In fact, that's what the origins are.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and so moving, as I discovered, there's all these other avenues. There's play therapy, and there's other things, that really spoke to me. So I found this program back east that I went, and I trained at a private center back there for called Sunrise for about 5 years, and then I took that knowledge, came out to California, and through some experiences of my own and research that came out from Stanford at the time and a few other things, I started to mold it into kind of my own version of what I had learned at Sunrise, and came up with this developmental play therapy. And one of the key things that I decided as I was building it was that it had to fit within a bigger model, sort of a holistic model.
Right.
It had to be flexible enough that we recognize that every child is so completely different. So while there's a few tenets that are kind of the same across the board, it's not a canned approach that your kid has to do this and this and this and this. We actually go in and we look at them and we say, well, what do they like? And how can we inspire interaction? And how can I be the thing that they want? So that's one of the things I really love about it. It's different for every child, and it really, you can't just say, oh, you have a child with autism, go do this and this and this. I need to meet you, and I need to meet the child, and I need to know more about them, so that we can start to create ourselves as people around them that they want to be with, and they start to seek out, and they get that feeling internally of like, oh, I really want to play with that person. That's what we're trying to evoke in these kids. And food is one of those things where if you've got a child who's trying to do all that, and meanwhile they're getting sugar and gluten and all these things that disagree with them, you're putting obstacles in your way,
right,
for them to connect and develop socially. So that's how all that fits together.
I love it. And I love that your approach is so specific to each child, and where you meet that child where they're at and really understand who they are as a person, because I think that's probably why we get along so well and we collaborate on things, is because I very much view any clients that I work with in the same way. I have a saying where cookie cutters are for cookies, not people. And it's just, you've got to really meet that person and understand their bio-individuality and their personality and their living context, really, to be able to support them properly and really help them achieve the goals they want to get. And it's no different for a child. So I love that you think of it that way. That's beautiful. So let's talk about the whole food thing and the whole idea of picky eaters. And, this is something that people struggle with so much. I mean, as a parent to 2 kids myself, and I have one child who's very adventurous. I have one child who's very picky. I know, and even the adventurous child, she has her moments. So, this is something that a lot of parents deal with. And, there's sort of the traditional, you want to set boundaries and involve them in cooking and all of these kinds of things. But when you're dealing with a child who has, other pieces going on, and you can talk about what some of that would look like. But I think, we want to be really conscious. And I know we've had a lot of conversations. This is one of the reasons why I wanted to talk with you here and share what you have to say, because you can really exacerbate the challenge around food when you have a child with either sensory issues or processing issues or any of these sort of complicating factors. You can make your life so much worse as a parent, and you can make that child's relationship with food really traumatized. So let's kind of have that conversation. Is it, because we know that some of these heavy hitters that you just mentioned, when you've got sugar, you've got gluten, you've got dairy, some of these things are really common. They're not the whole problem, but they're a piece of the puzzle, and they're also extremely addictive, right? So it's hard enough for adults to get off this stuff. And, so let's talk about what this is. Is it a lost cause to even try this with a child who's, anywhere on the spectrum?
Definitely not a lost cause. That would be the first thing I would say to any parent, is that no matter how bad you think it is, and I've seen some kids that, I don't know how they're living, what they're eating. Honestly, that from where they start. No, there's always a way. Honestly, I don't come away from places where there's kids aren't making any progress. I have one little boy that I'm thinking of right now who's probably the most stubborn case I've seen, but I even look at that and I'm thinking, well, okay, there's nothing really to panic about there. He's making forward progress. It's just a bit slower. And he's, right. And I'll talk about some of his background, and I'll talk right. about why he's maybe in the place that he's at and what we're doing to do that. But I think the first place to go is to understand that what your particular child's reasons are. for being a picky eater.
Okay.
So, one of the most common things for children with autism is that every single child with autism also has an accompanying sensory integration challenge, meaning that their sensory system is not experiencing the world and processing the world the same way that you and I are. In this absolute, the most common place that it manifests is in your vestibular system, so your balance.
Okay.
Your proprioception, so that's feeling where your body ends, the rest of the world begins, which can impact how you're eating, how you're feeling the food in your mouth.
Totally.
That can impact. Like if, I've had adults with autism say, it's not so much like the flavor, the taste of something that's getting them. It's they put it in their mouth and it's hard for them to feel it. They can't lateralize their food very well, and so it actually feels like they're going to choke.
Right.
And so for a child who can't speak, maybe he's having that same experience. It's literally a life and death feeling for them. So you got to. The first thing you do is you got to kind of step out of your experience,
right,
open to what their experience might be, and understand that this little 2, 3, 4-year-old is not just fighting for food because they want to eat, they want to survive, they have the same signals, right? It's just that when that food starts going in, some of it, maybe like a crunchy little cracker, is I can get my teeth around that, I can feel where that is in my mouth, I can crunch it, it's okay, I can do that. But mashed potatoes, forget about it.
Right.
It's like this quirky thing you think your kid might like. I've seen that. You're like, really, what kid won't eat that? But it's because it's too mushy. They can't feel it. They can move it around in their mouth. They don't know what to do with it, right? So that's one example. Then you might have a child whose olfactory senses are hypersensitive. So I'll give you an example. I was working with a young man, maybe 10 or 12 years old, and I walk in the room, and I'm literally 15 feet from this kid. He says, what did you eat? Your breath is horrible. I had a hamburger. I brush my teeth every day. I have good dental hygiene. So I'm walking in, and he's getting my lunch like a punch in the face.
Wow.
Right? And this is a child who wasn't always verbal. So if you go back in time and he's having the same experience and he's like withdrawing from food, and then we're like forcing it, you know what I mean? It creates this whole thing, just like what you described, where we're setting up a relationship that's defensive.
Yes.
Because they're protecting themselves. Most of the time, it's out of a sense of self-preservation.
Right.
Out of like, I don't know what that is. I don't know what it's going to feel like. I don't know what's going to happen once it goes in my mouth. Am I going to live? Seriously. So, taking a step back and sort of understanding that your child most likely not just being difficult. Okay.
And you're saying this, and I know that we're talking about children on the spectrum, and I think that's important for every parent to hear, is that it's almost always not just because they're trying to be difficult. It might not be something as extreme as this, these sensory examples that you just shared, but it could be that, they had a really challenging thing happened at school that they're not able to articulate, and they've got these really big emotions coming up, and it's just turning into a fight over broccoli. Right? It's so important for us to remember that they don't have the tools and to be able to communicate some of these things. And when you're talking about a child on the spectrum, that's really powerful to remember that this isn't just defiance, that this isn't them just being a pain, that this is, there's deep reasons. Now, what are some of the ways that a parent could figure out what is the trigger? With the example of, you walk into the room, he's 15 feet away and he can smell your lunch. So it's pretty clear that he's got an olfactory situation going on. But with the mashed potatoes versus a cracker example, how would you know?
First of all, I wouldn't put too much pressure on yourself to figure it exactly out. Right?
Okay.
I would say be observant. I would say, make note of what are all the foods that your child does eat. And not just what are they, but what are they like? What's their consistency? Are they salty? Are they crunchy? Are they, sort of get an idea. Not that you're necessarily going to look at that and go, aha, that's it. It's you're building an understanding. You're building a deeper sort of like, okay, well, these are all the things that he likes, and this is why I think he likes them. I'm kind of looking for a thread.
Right.
I've seen kids who just refuse to eat things based on their color. There's so many things that I think on the one hand, as a parent, you kind of have to trust that you know your child the best. And as long as you just sort of like step back, stop hitting the emergency button, and just observe them for a while, like take a period of time and don't try to change their diet.
Right.
Live this far, like let a week go by, let them eat what they're eating, and just sort of see, okay, oh, it's this, this, and this. And then as you introduce new foods, like, a lot of time a strategy we'll use is we try to introduce new foods that have some of those characteristics.
Right.
It might be, that I'm working with a child who, back up a second. The other thing that is a big driver for this, and it can go hand in hand with the sensory stuff, these don't have to be separate, they usually do go together, is a sense of control. So no matter what say if it's a sensory problem like hypersense of smell, or a proprioceptive problem, or inability to lateralize their food, whatever that is, usually what happens is it triggers a need for control.
Right.
Because they're feeling out of control. They're feeling like forced to do this thing that's like super invasive to my body. A lot of children with autism have a hyper sense of control and inflexibility. And the reason for that, most of these kids are trying to create some sense of predictability in their lives. They're trying to create sameness.
Yeah.
And without going too far into this whole neurological reason for that, so if they're there trying to create sameness in their life to kind of soothe their sensory system, soothe their neurological system, and then somebody comes along and is sort of forcing something into that system that they're trying to control, because once it falls apart, they fall apart, right?
Right.
They're going to get more controlling around it. And then what starts to happen is they're not even considering the thing that you're giving them. All they're hearing is, try this. They're not like, they see it all the time. Kids aren't even looking at what you're offering. They'll shun things that they like sometimes because they're not even considering it. So the first step for any child that's a super picky eater like this is you want to diffuse that control. You want to help them relax. You want to look at this as a fight or flight problem, right? So we want to like de-stress and de-trigger that, right? And the ways to do that are to actually take a break from trying so hard to get them to eat for a while.
Right.
Like if you're a parent that it's like, this is the thing that keeps you up at night and you're like, every day's a battle, and you just like, stop. It doesn't mean like, give them anything. It's like, okay, what are the best things that they eat? I'm going to do that. I'm going to offer that. That's going to be the thing that they get. And then I can do all these other sort of peripheral strategies that aren't a direct sort of push for food. So, and the last thing on that is, when I've seen some kids just on that part, just on the control, open completely up over like a month or two and all kinds of food.
That's brilliant.
Yeah.
Can you share an example about what this would look like a real example of with any clients or kids you've worked with, so that we can like really conceptualize exactly what you mean by that?
So a little girl, Taylor, who is so much, she was stereotypical, like picky eater, was only eating like, fruit snacks and rice, and it was all just like all the stuff that, like, please don't eat any more of that. Very processed sort of diet. Her mom, who's this little firecracker powerhouse, she just wasn't educated sort of in what real healthy eating meant. She was raised on a sort of a classic American processed diet. Got her educated, got her on board, and I said, okay, so listen, this is what we're gonna do. I'm gonna go in with a session with Taylor. Give me the food that she like detests the most. And it was broccoli. Classic. I got a plate of raw broccoli. And I'm like, yeah, I love these types of challenges. So I go in, and Taylor looks at that broccoli, and she's like, not having it. And I didn't talk about it. I didn't say, hey, here's broccoli. I just walked in with it, and I set it on the table, and I mentioned nothing about eating it at all. Okay, just set it there. And we just played. Right? We're playing, we're playing. And this is a very controlling child, okay, at the time. And so we're playing with these little figures, and she loved, sort of slapstick humor and just sort of off the wall stuff. And we're playing with her little dolls. And I just pick up a piece of broccoli, I don't even ask her permission. I don't mention that I'm picking up broccoli. I don't talk. I just use it as a toy. They come over, Mr. Broccoli, hey, and like they're playing together, and broccoli farts a little bit. It does something, so all of a sudden it's funny. It goes, oh, wow, I'm enjoying broccoli. Nobody's like threatening me with it, right?
Right.
We play that way for a while. I break off a little piece, and it's like a little broccoli baby walking along, and it's going, hey, why not? I go, ow, and I eat it. Right? When I bring the other broccoli guy, and I bite his head off, right? And it's like kind of gruesome, but kind of fun and interesting for her. And she just gets to be an audience, right? She's in control.
Totally.
Totally in control. There's nothing threatening about this. She just gets to watch. Okay? So fast forward like maybe 10 minutes, and I give her a piece of broccoli just to use as a prop. I just set it by her. I don't give her any instructions, set it by her. And she starts playing with it, and she's feeding me, and like she's getting, you can see her like comfortable, right?
Right.
And then I pick up like, and once I see like, okay, she's comfortable, I'm really comfortable, I'm going to take a shot here. I hand her a piece, right? And I hold one by my mouth and hold one by her mouth. She says, no. Okay, great. And I put it down. Move on we go. I give her this exaggerated control.
Right.
Here's the thing. For kids to have a feeling of being in control, we can't always be walking on eggshells, preempting where they're going to bump into that need for control, if that makes sense, right?
Right.
They have to be in a situation where they have to take it back. And if they get it, then they feel, I'm in control. So I create this sense of like fun. This is totally, chilled out. There's no stress around food. Every once in a while, I'll give you an opportunity to where either fairly direct or indirect, where you can try it or not try it. It's up to you. And when they say no, that's still a victory, because you've just shown them like, hey, take it or leave it. No skin off my back. It's never a have to. So now all of a sudden they can tolerate, it's in the room. And as a side note, Taylor's mom said that she wouldn't even allow it at the table before. Scream at her, bloody murder tantrum if you even brought anything green near the table, not just broccoli.
Okay.
So having this in the room is a big deal.
Right.
Touching it, putting it on her tongue, huge deal, right? By the end of that session, she took a bite and ate it. Okay, and I'm thinking, okay, great. That was for me. I'm novel. I'm the professional, blah, blah, things like that. So I go home. I get a call that evening from Taylor's mom. And she says, what did you do? And I said, what do you mean? She says, she devoured a plate of cooked broccoli at dinner that night. So, but now look, not every case goes like, well, that I would say is sort of best outcome.
Right.
And you see that happen fairly regularly. I'd say 40% of the kids that are really severe would do something like that. Okay. Same thing with her toilet training. She had the same sort of profile around it, incorporated into play, helped her relax, made it be her choice. It all opened up. That girl, Taylor, she went on a body ecology diet.
Wow.
Fermented foods. She was like, boom. Now, so there's a lot of things to kind of unpack in terms of what worked for her.
Right.
One was we emphasized her control, and we returned to just play and not making it a big deal, because before it was sort of the classic battle at every meal for them. So her relationship to food was out around conflict and getting my defenses up and saying no. That's what she was practicing, a fight.
Right.
So we've switched this, and we've look, it could be this way too, right? And then from that day forward, it was like, and here's what's really telling. She started to eat those fermented foods and good food, and she started to feel what impact that had on her body. A couple months later, some friends are over. Their kids have fruit snacks, which were like her crack.
Right.
They dropped a few. She goes over and picks them up, brings them to the parent of the other kid, says, I can't have these. They make my tummy hurt. Gave them back to her. Yeah.
Come on.
I know. I still get like.
Come on.
Yeah. So she's sort of the perfect example, right? Now to give you sort of another example.
Yeah.
The child I'm currently working with, I'll refrain from using his name, but he started with a very traumatic event, okay, which was he had to actually be hospitalized for megacolon.
Oh.
And so he had some severe constipation and all kinds of stuff going on. with his diet. And then on top of that, that triggered like them sort of trying to force him into a healthier diet.
Right.
Right. And so I would sort of say he's one of the more sort of entrenched guys, right?
Right.
And what we've noticed with him, though, he's still moving. It's the same formula.
Interesting.
So, right? So his mom, because she just, she loves him so much, obviously, she wants the best for him. She's this amazing cook. She cooks all this healthy stuff. It's just not getting eaten, right? And so every day that passes, she's sort of putting this pressure on herself, like, well, it's, like it's her fault when it's not. And she's also equated this belief around her worth as a parent being attached to her child eating, right? Which is never a good idea.
No.
Because that's not what defines a good parent, first of all, right? Second of all, that just ends up putting more pressure on the situation. You're like, I gotta be a good parent. He's like, no, I don't want the food. And then it's just nothing's changing. What we've noticed with him is that when he goes to places like farmers markets, or he's with his dad, whose dad's like one of the mellowest people I've ever met, no pressure coming from there. He's tried things like sea urchin of his own choice. He tried I want to try that meat pie, right? So when he's left to his own devices and there's no pressure, his curiosity about food starts to kick in.
Right.
Right. It's when it's pushed directly at him, or when he sniffs out sort of a contrived situation, he's not having that. Right. So that's the other piece of this is you have the control piece, but then you have to trust your kids too.
Right.
I think as adults, we get into this mindset like they just don't want to do it. They're not going to do it. And kids are so curious. Food, they love food. Even these picky eaters, they love food. They just have a different experience right now when you turn that around. And so as you're doing this and you're diffusing the control and all this, you want to put them in situations where they have the opportunity to decide to try something new.
I love it.
That's just that enough.
It's so funny, with my girls, one of the things that I've noticed, I'll use like a super simple example of like breakfast. If you ask them what they want for breakfast, they'll want the gluten-free oatmeal, or they'll want like waffles, and we do, our own homemade paleo waffles, but still, they're still waffles, as opposed to like eggs and veggies. And so what I've noticed though, is if I make, just the other day, I made oatmeal and it was there. And then I made myself a breakfast burrito that had a bunch of veggies and some eggs and, and avocado and things in it. And my eldest was like, well, why do you get that? And I have to eat oatmeal, and then she wanted a breakfast burrito because it was what I was eating. And it was 100% her choice, the control that you're talking about, her own curiosity, so that's such a good reminder of things. And I know, people sometimes think we've got this all figured out because we're in the field. And let me tell you, we have arguments around the table about stuff just as much as anyone else. And it's just such a good reminder that, and also making things playful. I know that sometimes I watch my youngest, she's now 2.5, just to get in there with food. And it's so tempting to be like, don't do it because, mess or whatnot. But it's so important for her to just feel it. And, kind of coming back to what you talked about at the beginning, the sensory piece. My husband, James, is a chef, and he talks about that even, with adults, we like food for so many things beyond just the nutritional value. I mean, that's actually the bottom of the list for most people, but the comfort that you get from it and certain textures and flavors and figuring that out and then working with that as opposed to just ignoring it as important information or just sort of writing it off as oh, whatever, if somebody loved, I would assume, and you tell me if I'm right, but if if there's a child who has these sensory issues and they really like crackers and the crunch, then you find healthy things that have that crunch that, and you give that to them as opposed to the mashed potatoes or the smoothie,
Right. Yeah, precisely. And one of the biggest things that parents do is find alternatives, healthy alternatives to the things that their kids are already eating.
Totally.
And in doing so, one of the things is that I really caution parents on taking too many things away at once.
Yeah.
Because what can happen is, even though we don't want them to have these things that they're addicted to, sugar or whatever, is that you can trigger that same sort of like, the hell,
Right.
I can't do anything, right? And then give them all this other stuff versus kind of maybe shed off like the two worst things, let's say.
Right.
You know, and then keep the other stuff for now and then add things to it. It's like, so you feel like you're giving them stuff versus taking things away.
Right.
Yeah, here's the other thing with autism. Most of these kids have some sort of communication challenge, so they're not able to express to us what might be going on for them, their experience of food, what they're thinking, what they're feeling, all those sorts of things. Why they don't want something, right? There's generally a reason. And then beyond that, they have very little control in their life in general.
Right.
You can kind of put yourself in the shoes of a kid who's being carted from therapy to therapy and sort of being poked and prodded and told what to do all day. You know, there's very few places where they can exercise control. And, you know, I guarantee you, if your audience is full of parents that have children with autism, they have experienced, most of them experience two things. Some level of control around eating and going to the toilet. Because those are the two places where kids can be in the most control.
Right.
You can't make them go to the toilet if they don't want to. Good luck. I'd like to see you try. And you can't really force feed them.
No.
Yes, you could, but you know, like those are where they seek control.
Yeah.
What you have to take some comfort in is that, you know, barring some very rare case, children are not going to starve themselves like that.
No.
Something that's going to happen. There's lots of evolution behind that. They want to survive. And two is that if you give them that control and you reduce the stress in their life as much as you can, their natural curiosity around things like this will start to emerge. It's just you got to back away and just let that opening sort of.
I love it. Now, one thing I want to ask as well, you and I had talked about some structural things that you've discovered recently just in the palate that can be having a significant impact on all of this as well. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So a little background, my wife is a speech pathologist, as you know. And one of the things that she had been looking at and turned me on to, because she thought it might be impacting some of this, is whether or not a child is tongue-tied. And we often think of that as impacting speech, right? But what can happen in terms of eating, as I referred to this earlier, is that it affects a child's ability to lateralize and move food around in their mouth. And that's a big part of how we chew and digest and take things in, and different textures are handled different ways. So, like I said, one child might be able to take in something really crunchy and crisp and sort of, you know, it's got some structure to it. But the sort of more mushy stuff just falls apart in their mouth, and they can't coordinate their tongue and can't move it around and can't control it in their mouth, and like they might be choking and that sort of thing. So I think it triggers some of those, you know, can trigger gag reflexes a lot.
Right.
And, you know, sometimes parents think they're just being over dramatic. They're like, oh, you know, and it's real. So literally today, that's where I went to a doctor's appointment today with that doctor who was looking. I actually have a tongue tie.
Oh, there you go.
It's a very common thing, much more common than Kim had realized before in her practice. And so if you have a child with that is a picky eater, I would have it checked out.
Yeah.
And it is workable. It's a very minor procedure that can go in and sniff the bit of tissue under there. And for some kids, it makes a huge bit of difference, not only with their eating and their diet, but with their ability to talk, which is a huge thing for families with children with autism. So
Right.
the tongue tie, and the doctor that we go to here is a man, Zagi, Zhagi.
And that's in LA.
Yeah. But he's great. I mean, you know, even to do a sort of Skype consult or something might not be a bad idea. He's sort of the top guy.
That's great.
I'll give you a bunch of information that we can post.
Perfect.
Yeah. So we're looking more into that to see if there's anything that we can come up with in the meantime for families who aren't getting the procedure, how that affects. And mostly it's, in my mind, understanding that there's something like that going on is very.
That's such helpful information. I think for anybody, you know, autistic or not, I think, you know, if your kid is really picky, I think that could be. And I know, you know, I learned about the tongue tie situation and then lip ties and things in the context of nursing. But I think sometimes, you know, once you get past that nursing phase, and, you know, you don't have to worry about it anymore. But this is such a good point. I've actually never even considered the fact that, of course, your tongue is absolutely essential to moving food around your mouth and being able to chew properly and swallow properly. So, like, it makes perfect sense. We've just never considered it, right?
Exactly. Well, and for a lot of us, what I learned today was like, you know, my tongue tie didn't affect my speech or my eating or anything like that. But, you know, it's got all kinds of problems with my sinuses and everything. So, yeah, it certainly can lead to that.
Yeah. I feel like we could talk all day long, but I'm also keeping mindful of the time here. So how can people find more information about you? And I know that you have some courses for parents who are interested in this kind of thing. Can you share a little bit more about where people can find you and what kind of stuff you have for folks who want to dive deeper?
Yeah, and just the one last point I want to make real quick as into that is that, you know, especially for children with autism, parents can find it very difficult to really get down and know how to play and connect with their children through play.
Yeah.
That is a part of this process that we're talking about as well.
Right.
Because when you're in there and you're playing with your kids and you're carving out that time to create yourself as a fun, sort of magnetic source of enjoyment, you're taking yourself out of that sort of policing role, you're redefining your relationship. And you're redefining your relationship as somebody that is fun and kind of relaxed and a place to go for comfort and good times, and not always geared up to something that's going to come later on. So playing with your children, even when it's not focused on food, will help that process.
That's brilliant advice. Brilliant advice. And I'm sure, I mean, I definitely didn't think of it. So I'm so glad that you shared that. Probably helps with everything beyond food as well.
Yes, absolutely. And so having said that, my website is www.playknectgrow.org. And there's a whole library of courses on play therapy. There is also a course on picky eaters.
Great.
In you'll see there's sort of I think Mastering the Social Loop is sort of a flagship course, and that is free to everybody to help you kind of learn how to play with your kids. So
great.
Learn how to get that interaction rolling. And then, I'll send you the links and everything to courses just so you have the specifics.
Perfect. So we'll include all of that in, I want to say, the show notes. I listen to too many podcasts. This isn't a podcast, but I will put it in in the post right below this video for folks. So it's easy there for you. And I really highly encourage you guys to check it out. I mean, clearly, Aaron knows his stuff really, really well. I've learned so much. I'm sitting here taking notes over here. I've learned so much. This is so helpful. Thank you so much, Aaron. This has been wonderful. Any last sort of closing words of advice that you want to leave everyone with?
Yeah. Don't be hard on yourself. Let it be easy, because the easier you can be, the easier they're going to feel. They're going to pick up on that, and that it all boils down to really living kind of a stress-free life as much as you can.
That's awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.